The Mets are trying to keep it classy out in San Diego, and they'll try and avoid the sweep to the Padres. So let's talk some baseball with James Schiano, host of the Mets'd Up Podcast. James, appreciate you hopping on, man. First time in the Zoom room with me. Let's get straight into this thing. I got a stat for you because the Fab Four, as you know, they're in the funk right now. Brendan Nimmo, 2 for his last 18. Francisco Lindor, 8 for his last 55. Juan Soto, 5 for his last 43. And Pete Alonso, 5 for his last 57. Who needs to get out of this funk the fastest?
I mean, between them all, it's definitely a combination of Lindor and Alonso. There's just been such a funk from those guys now going on for months, where we've kind of just seen like Soto since the All-Star break, Nimmo for a week or two now. The bottom of the lineup in the bullpen really carried that sweep in San Francisco, which was nice to see, but it comes down to Lindor and Alonso. Alonso, we're going on a month and a half, 2 months of him doing absolutely nothing. Francisco Lindor, even probably a smidge longer than that, basically since the broken toe that happened all the way back late May, early June, to where he hasn't been anything like the same player since then. We've seen some big games from him in the midst, but there's been no level of consistency. There's been shrinking of his contact rate. Pete Alonso has stopped pulling the ball. He stopped lifting in the air. All the things that he was doing so well through those first 6-8 weeks of the season to look like an MVP candidate, to look like one of the best power hitters in baseball. This team can't really go very far if those guys aren't hitting well. And there has to be something that changes fast with the two of them if we want to get where we want to get to.
Yeah, I'm glad you jumped in and said that because you took the words right out of my mouth. You mentioned how the bullpen carried them during the Giants series, but let's talk about the starting pitching rotation. No Mets starter outside of David Peterson has been able to complete 6 innings since Clay Holmes back on June 7th. The Padres have scored 14 runs in 2 games this series. Is that stat, and I guess the pitching, something that people have to pay attention a little bit more to going forward?
Oh, for sure. Two nights in a row, we saw, for lack of a better term, implosions by, first it began with Frankie Montas, then Huascar Brazoban, and then last night, Jose Butto, and then Chris Stavinsky. And it is kind of starting to come back together. I see you flashing that McGill picture here. I think McGill is oddly a guy that we've missed recently. I know we missed him more during that Justin Hageman, Brandon Waddell phase, but just having a 6th guy in this rotation to give these pitchers an extra day, because Clay Holmes, I know we got to 100 pitches last time out. He's going to pitch for the Mets later today. That was the second time going over 100 pitches in the last 7 starts. David Peterson's been the horse, but now we're on a few weeks with this Kodai Senga, Sean Manaea thing, where both of those guys are pitching well enough. They're both pitching well enough to keep us in and give us chances to win these games, but Manaea especially, he began his rehab assignment about 6 weeks ago now, and we still get to spots every time he pitches to when he's around 70 pitches or so, his velocity drops like a rock. He threw a handful of fastballs yesterday, below 90 miles an hour. The same thing happened to start before that, and the same thing happened to start before that. That's not really tenable for Sean Manaea. He can't be throwing 89-mile-an-hour fastballs and expect to be the Sean Manaea that we signed him to be, the Sean Manaea that we saw last year, the Sean Manaea we hoped we get this season. So there is some fear about how much longer this is going to take for Sean Manaea to be at full strength, because we're at nearing months that he has been pitching competitively, and we're still not ready to let him go deeper into games because the velocity won't hold up. Where Kodai Senga, similarly, there's been a lot of inconsistencies this year. The injury in the middle of it was a real just thorn in the Mets' side, but it's just more about his execution. I'm more confident in him moving forward. This command situation seems like a sequencing issue, but I need to see Sean Manaea sustain that velocity past that 75-80 pitch mark before I'm really ready to put my foot down and be like, this is the same guy that we saw last year again.
You mentioned Brazoban earlier. The news broke that he just got sent down to the minors. He's pitched in more games than any other reliever on the team except for Reed Garrett. What's your thoughts on Brazoban going down to the minors?
It seems like Brazoban has moved down a rung in this bullpen hierarchy. Beginning of the year, we were locked in on Brazoban, kind of maybe not taking a step forward, but being one of the more trustworthy guys, getting these high leverage spots. And now with the news of his demotion, Carlos Mendoza did mention that he'd be stretched out to 4-year pitches or so at Syracuse. That's telling me that now Brazoban's kind of worked his way back into being hopefully some kind of multi-inning guy, but possibly even something like a mop-up guy, because Brazoban just hasn't been, again, a very reliable late-game, high-leverage reliever going on 2 or so months now. And it doesn't, that's not really that surprising. We acquired Huascar Brazoban on the trade deadline last season. He was someone who was 34, 35 years old with many minor league options that the Marlins were willing to give up for a low-level minor leaguer going back to them. He was never really brought here to be a high-leverage guy. He was brought here to be a guy that could pitch innings and be one of these chess pieces that David Stearns likes to use so well with going up, going down, being someone that we can move around. So it kind of makes sense that we could stretch him out to 30 or 40 pitches through the rest of the season. He's someone that can come into a game, soak up 2 2/3 innings, get himself to those 40 pitches, go back down to the minor leagues the next day, 10 days after that, come back up, do the same thing. So I think this is just a bit of a recalibration of role for Huascar Brazoban. And we still appreciate what he gave us in April and May, but understanding that the quality of pitcher is probably more like this role than what we saw early.
All right, we got the trade deadline going down on Thursday. There's reports out that the Mets could be one of the most aggressive teams in baseball at the deadline. So if you're David Stearns, what you buying?
I think that this conversation begins and ends with Luis Robert Jr. I know that a lot of Mets fans might not want to hear that name right now. You see the 206 batting average. You see 2 years of poor production. You see a nearly 30% strikeout rate. And you're like, why would the Mets want this guy? Especially when these Mark Vientos rumors are flying around, which I don't necessarily buy. But I think it's interesting that we are so linked to Robert. We need another right-handed bat in this lineup. We've seen this team struggle against left-handed pitching. As bad as Robert has been against pitchers in general this season with the 206 average and the 295 on base, he's still a lefty masher. And if you look back over the last month, we got 320 batting average, a 420 on base percentage, a 530 slugging with 3 homers and 4 stolen bases. We don't like to cherry pick and choose these months we're talking about with a guy like Robert, especially when you have a year plus of bad play. But we've seen a couple of players leave this White Sox disaster team over the last year or so and find success elsewhere. Right now, Andrew Vaughn, the Milwaukee Brewers, they made a pretty innocuous trade for him from the White Sox a month or so ago. He went down to the minor leagues for 2 weeks. He's become a stalwart in the middle of their lineup. He's running the highest walk rate of his career, the lowest chase rate. Very small tweaks and changes to these guys that are playing in these organizations that we will not perceive as smart or advanced to be nice can make a difference very quickly. And even if you don't get the Luis Robert from a few years ago, who got down ballot MVP votes, you still have a much better defensive center fielder than Jeff McNeil and a much better offensive center fielder than Tyrone Taylor. That's someone that if he's hitting 5th or 6th in the lineup on most days, it's a huge upgrade, a huge addition to this team, and one I think that David Stearns and the Mets are serious about going after.
Real quick, James, about 15 to 20 seconds. Final thoughts on this Game 3 of this Padres series before the Mets head back to Citi Field on Friday to take on the Giants.
It's one I'd really like to win. You want to avoid being swept by these teams in the National League you're competing against. I know our sights are still set on the Phillies for the division, but it's a good chance you might wind up competing with this Padres team for a wild card spot. There's a good chance if you're competing with them for a wild card spot, it might be a home series here or a home series there, like we saw a few years ago. So you got to win this game. I don't know what we're going to get out of Clay Holmes workload-wise after the 100 pitches he threw last time out, but I mean, you got to hope he can get near that again, get us to the 5th, 6th inning, and give this bullpen a chance to hopefully protect the lead, especially given what's going on with this lineup recently.
All right, James. Appreciate you hopping on with me, man.
Thank you, Brandon.